and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth Series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Today, we're starting a series of discussions with our area legislators, legislative preview conversations, to find out what's on the top of their minds as the new legislative session is about to get started. We're going to start off today with Representative Linda Joy Sullivan, who represents the district that includes Dorset, Danby, Landgrove, Peru, and Mount Tabor, and to hear from her what she thinks might be most important for the legislature to tackle as the new session gets underway.
Thanks for doing this, Andy. I really appreciate this. January 6th, we go back, and while it was being decided if we should actually go back physically or if we should go remotely or hybrid, it was finally decided it would be remote. And you're right, the COVID issue in my mind is the key. You know, will there be more money coming in? Who will get it? How will we help people get out of the pandemic? How will we get rid of the fears? And how will we make sure that there's economic development? So, but to start off, I believe that the first thing we will be doing after electing the speaker and other officers is to set up the rules for the municipalities to be able to do their, voting and balloting and Australian ballots. So that will be the kickoff. And I know that GovOps has a draft bill that they will be presenting. So that will be probably the first bill that we'll attend to. I personally think coming out of COVID, I would like to see us use this session, and this is my thought, more as a planning stage rather than heading into more social policy legislation. I think it's very important that we focus on some number crunching with the unfunded pension liability situation that's going on. Coming out of a pandemic, we're going to have to face housing issues, affordable housing. So there are a lot of ramifications and byproducts that are going to come out of the pandemic. I'm big on focusing on affordable housing. I think that's very important. I threw in a draft bill, and I should, be getting that finalized pretty soon so that it'll hit the queue the first week in January. So trying to find solutions that way, trying to find solutions on all of the monies that JFO is saying from the CARES Act. Okay, people asked for this, people asked for that, what can be dispersed? So after that's all gone, what happens? And so we have to use caution. The other area that I think we should focus on is the almost like the farm to plate, issue, because the farmers are in dire need. Land and competing business-wise. The farmers markets were a big struggle for them with all of the COVID rules. So I think there's an opportunity there for us to look at how do we make sure everybody has food? How does everybody have the essentials? So that's what I would like to see. The unfunded pension liability, which has just been the elephant in the room for how many years now, So, we had a current speaker who was the chair of appropriations all of those years prior, who was overseeing this unfunded pension liability, and now there's going to be a new dynamic. And I believe the new speaker is more keen to facing some of these issues. That's my hopes. That doesn't mean that's what's going to happen.
Well, that's our starting point. I guess I just was curious to get your sense of what you saw as the fiscal outlook for the state. I mean, I've heard lots of numbers being thrown around where the state was taking in more revenue than they expected, and the federal CARES Act money had been a big help. I've also heard that I think it was the tax commissioner, Mr. Bolio, a couple of weeks ago, saying that there's a possibility that education taxes might rise 9% or thereabouts. But in general, do you see the fiscal outlook for the state, given the fact that the economy has gone through an unusual year, and several sectors, the hospitality, obviously, the hospitality sector in particular, been pummeled pretty badly. That the same amount of revenue that would have occurred in a normal year just simply isn't going to be there.
I think you're spot on this question. I think the key is not so much the economy of the state, but the different sectors, the industries that are hit hard, and who will actually get the benefit or the money, and how do they come out of the fall that they've taken. So you're right as well with the tax commissioner is charged with issuing his letter. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the gospel, but people shouldn't take it lightly either, and they shouldn't try to massage the message. There's increases in health insurance, the COVID issues have happened. So there's going to be increases in property taxes, more likely than not. But that doesn't mean that the people who are voting at the local level are going to approve the budgets. And so now, pretty much the municipalities, the local areas are going to control first what the real budget's going to be. So the state is kind of, dependent upon how those votes go. I think that if you put the unfunded pension liability into the real numbers, we're not getting the whole picture. So if you throw that in there, we have a problem. We have a severe problem, because you're not just looking at just revenue now, you're looking at a balance sheet. And so when you isolate it and you say, let's just look at the budget, so when you just extrapolating from revenue and, expenses, that's one thing, but that changes all the time. Your balance sheet also changes, but if you're going to depreciate your assets to create more, money, so your assets go lower to get rid of the liability, hopefully. But if you start spending, we have nothing to tap into. I mean, normally people were tapping into deferred revenue. That's where they would, deferred assets, they would hide everything there, you can't do that anymore. So I think that while we have reserves, and the treasurer said we have reserves and we shouldn't panic, I think we need to be realistic and start to focus on, we won't panic, but how do we get rid of the debt that we have right now and still make sure that every single Vermonter is eating? We have people who they say are the upper economical earners. Okay, how many do we really have in the state of Vermont that are really that high end earners? And most of them now, because of COVID, are tapping into their retirement funds to live. So while they may be pulling money out and their tax returns show higher income because they're pulling funds out, they still have to pay the IRS, and they go further into debt on the tax effects. So just because their lifestyles are different, and now they're losing those lifestyles, and people are going to have to sell their homes, and people are going to have to move. And if more of the smaller homes are selling in Vermont, where will those people go? And who, if they take a loss on their larger homes, where are they going to go? And so it's really complex. It's not as, straightforward as people think. So it's not like, oh, Vermont's out of money, it's bankrupt. That's not true. It's not that Vermont isn't bankrupt, because that's not true either. So it depends on the totality of the picture and the way you look at it.
So what is the total size of the unfunded pension obligation shortfall at this point? That's a number I've heard bouncing around, 3 to 4 billion. I've heard roughly. Is that the rough range we're talking about?
So that's pretty much the latest numbers, it's the up that $4 billion range, because, it depends too. You have people who are still retiring, and so it's getting paid out, and then you have new people coming in. So it's going, but that's your range right now.
Well, but I'm just wondering, in this year or this coming year in 2021, when there's so many unusual scenarios playing out, is this really the year that we need to take a real substantial bite out of that for 4 billion or whatever hole? I mean, is there going to be the appetite, I guess, to continue the metaphor among your fellow legislative colleagues to say, well, we need to chop that number down by whatever percentage seems right?
So my communications with people who are more interested in this area, like the treasurer and other people who really think this is a serious issue, truly believe that taking no action is just not an option. Okay, I really believe that this needs to be focused on right now, because you can't just keep promising more money to new state employees and teachers who are coming in, and you can't keep promising people who are retiring that they can retire off of the money you said that they were going to be able to get. So, just taking no action, there'd be too many consequences to that. There'll be further potential underfunding, with further damage to the system. So I don't see how we can ignore that. The key is appropriations now. The chair of appropriations, who is focusing, Kitty Toll, who is focusing on this issue towards the end of the last session, she's no longer there, and some other people have left. So you have to wonder how that committee is going to be stacked. Is it going to be stacked for focus on this issue, or is it going to be stacked with focusing on more ideological social policies? So that's up to our new speaker. And my hopes are that there will be due diligence done, and there will be a realization that we have to come up with some kind of a plan. We have to come up with staying the way we are. We have to come up with making a decision if it's a defined contribution plan, a defined benefit plan, if we're going to go into more of the 401k matching style that happened way back in the 80s. Because the federal government pretty much has said, when states have reached out and said, hey, we need some help, they said, well, we're running on fumes, go file bankruptcy. And so that's not an option. So, and who knows where the pensions actually fit in the bankruptcy code as well. Are they exempt? Are they not exempt? What portions are? And I don't think Vermont wants to go that route. So I really believe that this should be a top priority, because it affects everybody in the state of Vermont. I might be a little passionate about this area.
I had no idea. I guess I was wondering, another piece of legislation that kind of died on the cutting room floor, I guess you could say, last year was Act 250. You and your colleagues put a tremendous amount of time into coming up with some new legislation to replace the original act. That was 50 years old or so. But that eventually kind of didn't pass muster, I guess. Is this an issue, since there's a big economic development aspect to that legislation, which maybe is a lot more relevant now than it might have seemed a year or two ago? Is there any appetite amongst your colleagues, you think, for trying to pick up where you left off on that and coming up with some compromises or whatever that would push that across the finish line, or is that just dead for now?
So I think there's going to be an appetite for Act 250. I personally think we should not do it this year. We should do it next year, because last year it was, I'm trying to think of very polite words, it was not exactly a productive. Nobody came up with a solution on that. My concern is that Act 250 is not going to be focused on economic benefits and product that could come out of this new working with Act 250 to make it move forward, but that legislators will use it to focus more on climate change and global warming, and use that as the vehicle this time to keep the climate movement going. And I have grave concerns about that. So I think, if, as I said in the beginning, we need to plan. This year, we should sit down and make a strategic plan on how we are going to work. If it's Act 250, what is Act 250 really going to be used for now? What are we going to accomplish? Do we want to focus on economic development, or do we want to use it, okay, for the criteria that strictly says, let's focus on the climate areas only? And, you know, you could put words in that say, oh yeah, economic development, it's, you know, climate change is going to help economic development, but we need some solutions. And you can't keep it too vague. I mean, the Global Warming Act was another one that was quite vague. And so we want to be careful. So I think Act 250, there will be an appetite for it. My hope is that it won't be used as a vehicle to produce something it's differently than it's intended to do.
Do you think that Global Warming Solutions Act that the legislature passed last year, is that going to be going forward? I know the governor was at best lukewarm about that. That's probably being overly generous, actually. But I know that's been a very controversial thing. And will that committee, the 22 or 23 member commission, will that they'll start meeting, I guess, and will they be coming up with any proposals that would prompt a legislative action between now and, let's say, May or June, or is that more likely to be farther down the road?
So they have already begun meeting. I think they've definitely had one meeting. I think the second one may be going on right, you know, as we're speaking or coming up shortly. I personally have to say, you know, H688, even though I voted for it, but I voted for it because I thought, okay, it's going to be for other reasons than my constituents I spoke with, but also because it was, in my opinion, a way to end it and let the federal new administration take over and run with it. But I think that bill is a mess. Okay, I really do. I mean, if the council doesn't adopt a plan, A&R can do whatever it wants to actually meet the law's required reduction that's identified in section 578, okay? But then how are they going to put together a plan? And it has to have all 8 separate objectives to it. So they're never going to be actually able to meet every single one of that criteria. And the council itself, as far as I'm concerned, is the selected people, as wonderful as they are, should have been on an advisory committee. Those are not the people who belong on this council, because they all have conflicts of interest. And I have a bill that I have put in, okay, that addresses conflicts of interest on this specific council. Because, you know, if I'm, say, the executive director of Capstone and I'm on there, I mean, I'm going to benefit by whatever my vote is, and I am going to be strongly choosing one way to vote, and they put lobbyists on it and their clients. I mean, it just, you know, it was almost as, everybody yelled, hey, let the new justice be chosen by the new administration. Well, this council probably should have been chosen by the new speaker. And so do I think that there's going to be issues with litigation? And I know that people tried to massage that, but yes, of course, because every single person is going to have the right to challenge any state action, especially if it's not documented with compliance issues. So this is not going away, because this particular bill was a political statement as well as a climate movement. And so I think that we have to be smarter now, and we have to tighten the ropes, and we really have to say, we have conflicts of interest here, and if we really want to do the right thing, who's going to be in charge? Because right now, A&R, it's up to A&R to do what they want.
Just to pivot a little bit, you mentioned the new House leadership there. There's also new leadership in the Senate side as well, and you have a new majority leader in the Democratic Party. What do you make of this new leadership? All female, number one, I guess, worth noting.
Less testosterone.
What is your sense of this new group? Are they going to be able to work together better than it seemed like from afar that Mitzi Johnson and the Senate pro temp leader weren't able to kind of merge their efforts as well as, at least that's one of my takeaway, that they weren't as smooth functioning team as they would have been helpful. Will this new group be more likely to kind of, be able to be in sync?
Well, I think this group will be more in sync, since I believe that they're all Emerge graduates. I think they all are more progressively aligned, and I do believe they're all from Emerge, that, the organization of Progressive Democrats. And so I think that they are all eager and hardworking people, and I think that they will try their best to listen to their the House and the Senate, the legislators who are within their domain. So as far as the prior speaker and the prior pro temp, it's not so bad if there is a dynamic where there's not going to be total agreement. I found myself often taking my issues to the Senate and sending them to the pro temps, because he really understood the legal aspects and he would fix things. And so I thought that was very important. For me, it's very important to have a speaker who knows the rules, okay, and not just relies upon, the clerk to run the show, but actually knows the rules and keeps a domain that is not toxic, but open for discussion. So I do believe that these women will be that way. I think they will work together diligently to try their best, but I do think that they are more progressive than the former pro temp. Even though he was a progressive, I think he was more grounded in systems. And so, there's going to be a different dynamic.
And that was Tim Ash, the name I was
right.
remember there a moment ago. So just to kind of finish things off here, I guess I was wondering, you've been meeting remotely now, 9 months now, or whatever, or ever since the pandemic began to kick in force. Was Zooming as productive and effective as actually being in a room together and hashing it all out face to face, or how did that go?
So I think it's not nearly as productive as being up there face to face. And, as far as driving up there, if you don't want to drive, don't run for the seat. Okay. But the bottom line is, when you are on a Zoom call and, there are chairs who control it, and the tendency can be, well, let's not get into the details because we don't want to go to conference committees, and we don't want to do this, and we don't want to be sitting on Zoom calls for another 10 hours. Well, too bad. You need to do your job. So it's more controlled, and it's not as intimately obvious facial expressions, interaction, asking questions, because you're raising little hands and the public doesn't see who's raising their hand. So it's not as transparent as people are making it out to be. People are saying, oh, look, the public gets to listen. Well, the public could listen anyway. They were always able to listen. But you could just keep the YouTube part for the public. I can see sometimes if we went forward, having witnesses who didn't want to participate through Zoom, but they call in also. They've always called in if they couldn't make it. We've had witnesses testify from out of state, but the interaction to be able to say, I'm going to run out there, Andy, and we're going to meet right now. Meet me in the cafeteria. I have to talk to you about this. That's gone. Because now it's appointment scheduling. So now it's like, oh, can you talk to me? Well, I could do it at 3 o'clock, or I could do it at 8 o'clock, or, but then the issue's dead. And then if you want to go into rooms to chat with people, you don't want leadership or somebody else designing those rooms for you. So I think it is not as effective. I think it actually makes us more of sorority fraternity legislators, as opposed to hardcore, follow the rules, pay attention to the details, and negotiate legislators. And what does Vermont need?
Well, it's going to be a different year for sure. And we'll see how it goes. I'm sure there'll be a lot to do. There always seems like there is.
Right. But the key is everybody needs to stay safe, and the governor is doing his darndest to make sure that that is what's happening, whether people agree or disagree, tough decisions out there to keep people alive and safe, and that's the priority. Right.
That's number one. Well, Representative Sullivan, thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it. Hearing your insights and thoughts about the coming session, and we'll all be watching from afar on our Zoom screens.
Thank you so much, and you stay safe and have a happy holiday.
You too.